Hello everyone. Welcome back to my book Strategic Management Accounting, a critical exploration with a sustainability angle. Now we are in Chapter 2. Reconceptualizing Competition. Discourses of competitive advantage and strategic positioning. This chapter has two key themes. The first one is Pre-Porterian discourses of strategy. That is, various strategic management concepts and frameworks emerged before Michael Porter's seminal or popular contribution or reconceptualization of strategy discourses. And the second one, Porterian discourses of strategy. So these two themes are discussed in two separate videos. And this is the first one, basically concentrating on Pre-Porterian discourses of strategy. The strategy discourses started in 1960s, especially with the seminal work of Alfred Chandler, his book Strategy and Structure. In his book, he articulates a specific historical context within which corporate planning or strategy discourses started to emerge. That is, the third wave of mergers and acquisitions. And because of this mergers and acquisitions, especially happened in US, there emerged what he called the M-form organizations or multi-divisional organizations. So the multi-divisional organizations then came to be known as the corporations in strategic management terms, a corporate entity. A corporate entity would constitute multiple businesses operating in distinct, unique, their own competitive terrains, their own market conditions. So such a business unit or such a business division is called an SBU, Strategic Business Unit. The salient feature or the defining feature of a strategic business unit is that it has its own unique competitive conditions, independent and different from the other businesses belonging to this corporate entity. So in that sense, a corporation is a collection of SBUs. And the corporate managers are those managers who oversee, monitor, and plan the collectivity, the totality of these SBUs. So therefore, the corporate managers challenge, the issues that the corporate managers would face are threefold, according to Alfred Chandler. The first one is coordination between these multiple strategic business units. And second one is creating a viable, legitimate connection between internal dynamics of this corporate entity and the external environmental dynamics. So that is something to do with environmental synchrony between the external environment and the internal environment of the corporations and its divisions. The third one is the growth of this corporate entity as a totality. The diversification and growth of this corporate entity as a totality. So those are the three key issues that Chandler identified as the managerial or strategic issues that the corporate managers has to deal with. Then later on, after Chandler, some other scholars, especially the consultancy gurus or management gurus, also identified a fourth challenge, that is the behavioral or cultural issues in implementing strategies. So with that, in this unit, we are going to talk about 4 key issues. The coordination among multiple business divisions, environmental synchrony, and the growth or diversification strategies, and finally, the cultural and behavioral dynamics of implementing strategies. Now, when we think about the coordination among SBUs, Chandler talks about 3 key sub-issues. One is setting long-term objectives for the corporation as a whole, as well as for those individual SBUs. So long-term goal setting. And second one is policy planning or policy formulation. Creation of policies applicable for all these multiple divisions, so that these decentralized, individually operating, independent business units can ultimately be considered as elements, divisions of the totality of these divisions or the corporation. So that is corporate policy formulation. And third one is resource allocations. And of these 3, now we are going to talk about mostly about this resource allocation issue. And when it comes to the resource allocation issue, as well as the long-term corporate objectives, there's one very critical accounting calculation emerged. That is the return on investment. So the accounting notion of return on investment was invented and popularized in order to broadly think about how well each of these strategic business units are performing. So it's an investment-based assessment of how these firms are performing. Return on investment. For example, Dupont, the famous Dupont system of ratio analysis came into being so that the return on investment can be decomposed into its fundamental elements. So such accounting calculations underpinned the way the corporate managers can assess the performance of individual business entities. So that's one broader framework or accounting calculation that was necessitated in order to manage the multidivisional organizations or M-form organizations. Then there emerged a specific set of framework or models that we now call portfolio planning models. The classical examples for portfolio planning models are Boston Consultancy Group metrics and the General Electric 9-cell metrics. And the corporate planning models basically attempt to create a competitive map or competitive terrain or map of a competitive terrain in which the corporate planners or the corporate managers can locate their individual SBUs. So the corporate planners can think about strategies for their individual SBUs on the basis of their location in a portfolio planning map or a framework. So broadly speaking, in developing such a map, the portfolio planning model, there are two key criteria or dimensions to be taken into account. The first dimension is the assessment of the strength of the SBU. To assess how good, how big a given SBU is. So that the strength of the SBU is the first dimension of any portfolio planning model. And second dimension is the attractiveness of the market in which the SBU operates. So how attractive the market, how good the market in which the firm operates. So in that sense, the first dimension talks about how good the business is. Second dimension is talking about how good, where the business is operating. So ultimately deciding whether the right business in the right place. So that is the overall simple but the fundamental logic of portfolio planning frameworks. Now Boston Consultancy Group portfolio planning model assess the strength of the business on the basis of one single criteria, which is the relative market share. So in using that, Boston Consultancy Group would calculate the relative market share of each and every individual SBUs belonging to a corporate entity. The relative market share basically means the SBU market share divided by the market share of the best competitor in the market. Now, in that sense, if a particular SBU has the largest market share in that market, so its relative market share will be greater than 1. If a given business or SBU is not the largest market share holder of the market, then its relative market share will be less than 1. So basically relative market share is the market share of the SBU divided by the market share of the best competitor in the market. So in that sense, you can identify whether that particular SBU's market share is high or low. And then when it goes to attractiveness of the market, Boston Consultancy Group used again one single criteria, that is the growth rate of the market. If the market in which a particular SBU operates is highly growing one, or it could be a low growth one, the attractive one or not that attractive one. So it is decided on the basis of the market growth rate. Then accordingly, we have 4 possible decision or strategic scenarios. An SBU, a strong SBU with a large market share, relative market share, operating in highly attractive, highly growing market condition. So that is, Boston Consultancy Group call it a star. A strong business in a good place. So the decision to be done is what? Invest and grow. Expand that business. And the second possibility is a firm can be, or SBU can be, a large SBU, a strong SBU with a relatively high market share, but operating in a low-growing, non-attractive market scenario. So that market is saturated, not growing anymore, or having a very, very low growth rate or declining market. So, strong firm in an unattractive place. So that's called a cash cow. That's the jargon or the terminology or the name the Boston consultancy gave to that kind of a business. So the strategy is milk it. As much as possible, get the money out so that that money, extra money, can be invested in star. And then there's another possibility that a firm which is very weak, relatively weak market share, but operating in an attractive, high-growing market. So it is a question mark. Still small, maybe having a potential of growing into a star and then a cash cow, but in a very good market segment or a market. So invest selectively. Need further assessment and decide whether there's a possibility of making this question mark business into a cash cow and a star. And then finally, you can have SBU which is very weak or relatively weak, low market share, as well as operating in an unattractive, low-growing market. So that's what they call a dog. So that's the name BCG people gave to that kind of business. So yet again, so if that business is there, so you got to divest. You have to take money from that and move that money towards the other successful businesses operating in attractive places. So that's the key fundamental logic of portfolio planning. Identifying whether a particular SBU is strong and whether that SBU is operating in an attractive place. And on that basis, make a decision as to whether divest or invest. And then, the same logic was extended by General Electric. So General Electric 9-cell grid is not logically or conceptually different. It is the same fundamental logic. The difference is that instead of using the relative market share as the only criteria of assessing the strength of the business, it created a composite index using multiple calculations. So there is a composite index of multiple criteria brought together to assess the relative strength of the business. So it is more complicated and sophisticated. Similarly, to assess the attractiveness of the market, instead of using the growth rate, market growth rate, yet again, they develop a composite index composed of multiple indicators. So yet again, it is more complex and sophisticated. And then instead of having high-low differentiation, they came out with the idea that you can have high, medium, and low for both dimensions, resulting in 9 cells or 9 possible decision scenarios. So we call that particular extension, that particular portfolio planning model, the General Electric 9-cell grid. So both BCG and the GE 9-cell are portfolio planning models. Both capture the same conceptual logic, assessing the SBUs on the basis of their strength and the attractiveness of the market in which they operate, and then making either investment or divestment decisions on the basis of their relative positioning in this strategic map, either 4 areas or 9 areas strategic map. So that's about portfolio planning, resource allocation among SBUs. Then, when it comes to the problem of environment, the environment connection between internal and external, the strategic management discourses created the framework popularly known as SWOT analysis: strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis. So that basically means the corporate planners would assess internal organizational dynamics, internal organizational configuration, or the environment in terms of strength and weaknesses. And then they assess the external environmental dynamics in terms of opportunities and threats. So in that sense, the corporate planning involves matching these strengths and weaknesses with the opportunities and threats in the external environment. So that's called SWOT planning, environmental scanning kind of a framework. Still popular, still these things are used. Even though we talk them as Pre-Porterian framework, still in strategy discourses, in a corporate settings, organizational settings, these frameworks are differently used. So that's environmental issue related to corporate planning. Then third issue is the corporate growth through diversification. For that, there is another framework came out which articulate how a corporate entity can grow through diversification. So there are four different strategies to be identified, from the least risky to the highest risky. So this, yet again, that's a 2x2 matrix, 2x2 framework. So when you are going to diversify, you have to ask two fundamental questions. Are we going to operate in the same markets we operate in, or are we going to go into new markets? Then the other dimension is, are we going to operate with our existing product, or are we going to introduce new product? So in that sense, the most or the least risky strategy is market penetration or intensification. So that is, you are trying to maximize your market share, you are trying to maximize your profitability and so on, return on investment, by intensifying your marketing strategies in the same market with the same product. So you are going to concentrate in the existing market with the existing product, have an intensified effort to maximize your growth. More sales, more profit, and so on. So that is the least risky strategy, because you are in the existing market with the existing product. And then next strategy is going to a new market with the existing product. And then third possibility is introducing a new product to the existing market. And finally, the highest risky strategy is going to a new market with a new product. So those are the four key strategies: existing market with the existing product, new market with the existing product to a new market, and new market with a new product. So that's how the corporate planners thought about the possibilities of further growth through diversification. And then there emerged various discourses about the success of strategy implementation. Especially in 1970s and 80s, one of the critical problems was not designing or deciding strategies, but the implementation. So various consultancy frameworks and various management gurus came out with ideas as to why strategies fails and how can strategies can be better implemented. The classic example is McKinsey's 7S framework, which identifies 7 key factors that underpins the successful implementation of strategies. So those are the key ideas about Pre-Porterian strategy discourses. So to summarize, Pre-Porterian strategy discourses originated in 1960s, especially with the seminal work of Alfred Chandler. And the key issues of strategy is related to the multi-divisional or M-form organizations. So those are the organizations or the corporate entities with multiple business divisions. So the strategic issues are coordinating among these decentralized, diversified business entities. And then another issue is the environmental synchrony. And the third issue is growth through diversification. And finally, there is also various considerations about strategy implementation, especially cultural and behavioral dynamics of strategy implementation. So those are the key aspects this chapter covered in the first part, that is before Porter's contribution to strategy, which I will discuss in my next video. And until that, thank you very much for watching this video. See you again.